Bruce Lee stood at the center of the training hall, surrounded by his students. The air was thick with sweat, discipline, and admiration. Every eye followed his movements, every word he spoke landing like a command. His confidence wasn't loud, it was sharp, precise, unquestioned. This was a man who had reshaped martial arts itself. He wiped his hands, glanced around the room, and smirked. Karate, he scoffed lightly, shaking his head. A rigid system. Predictable. Kung Fu adapts, flows, evolves. The students leaned in closer. Karate can never defeat Kung Fu, Bruce continued calmly. Because when a style refuses to change, it breaks. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. Some students nodded eagerly. Others whispered, repeating his words like doctrine. To them, this wasn't arrogance, it was truth spoken by a master. Bruce paced slowly across the floor, hands clasped behind his back. Martial arts is not about memorizing movements, he said. It's about freedom. Adaptation. Being like water. The room felt electric. Then, a calm, steady voice spoke from the back. Every style works, if the fighter does. The words weren't loud. They weren't challenging. But they cut through the room like a blade. Silence fell instantly. Students turned their heads. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even Bruce stopped moving. From the shadows near the entrance, a man stepped forward. Tall, solid, relaxed. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to impress. Chuck Norris. He wore a plain training uniform, his expression unreadable. There was no anger in his eyes, only certainty. The kind that comes from years of discipline, not applause. Bruce studied him for a moment. Some students whispered urgently, "That's Chuck Norris. The karate champion. He's not supposed to be here." Bruce's lips curved into a faint smile. "So," Bruce said, voice calm but edged with curiosity, "you disagree?" Chuck didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend karate. He didn't attack kung fu. He simply said, "Styles don't fight. People do." The tension in the room tightened. This wasn't trash talk. This wasn't a challenge. It was something far more dangerous. A quiet truth. No one in that room realized it yet, but in the next moments, everything they believed about martial arts, ego, and mastery was about to be tested. And neither legend would walk away the same. This wasn't a movie set. There were no directors calling cut, no stunt coordinators planning choreography, no cameras waiting to capture dramatic angles. What was happening here was real, raw, and private. A closed-door martial arts gathering in the early days, when reputations were built on skill alone, not fame. The training hall was modest but serious. Wooden floors scarred by years of footwork. Walls lined with simple mats. The kind of place where respect was earned through discipline, not words. Bruce Lee was already a legend. His philosophy had begun reshaping martial arts around the world. Students didn't just train under him, they believed in him. To them, Bruce wasn't just a fighter. He was a thinker, a revolutionary. His ideas about freedom of movement and adaptability felt like the future. Chuck Norris, on the other hand, was known, but underestimated. He wasn't flashy. He didn't preach philosophy. He didn't surround himself with followers. His reputation came from tournaments, quiet victories, and relentless discipline. Traditional karate. Precise. Structured. Controlled. To many in the room, that made him outdated. Bruce noticed the shift in energy when Chuck stepped fully into the light. He studied him, not with hostility, but with curiosity. Bruce respected fighters. But he also believed deeply in his own conclusions. He smiled politely. "No disrespect," Bruce said, his tone calm and measured, "but karate is limited." A few students nodded instinctively. "It relies on form," Bruce continued, pacing slowly. "On memorized responses. When a system cannot adapt, it becomes trapped by its own rules." The words weren't insults. They were statements, spoken with the confidence of someone who had tested his beliefs again and again. Chuck listened without interrupting. When Bruce finished, Chuck gave a small nod. "Then let's test limitations," he said. No challenge in his voice. No anger. No ego. Just certainty. The room shifted. Some students exchanged uneasy looks. Others leaned forward, sensing something rare unfolding. This wasn't a clash of tempers, it was a clash of philosophies. Fluidity versus structure. Freedom versus discipline. Bruce stopped pacing. "Understand this," he said, meeting Chuck's eyes. "I don't believe in style superiority for pride. I believe in evolution." Chuck replied just as calmly. "And I believe discipline evolves the fighter." Silence followed. The kind of silence that comes before something important. Everyone could feel it now. This wasn't about proving who was better. It was about testing beliefs that defined entire systems. If Bruce was wrong, even slightly, it would shake his students' faith. If Chuck failed, it would confirm every stereotype about karate being outdated. Neither man raised his guard yet. Neither man moved. But the atmosphere tightened, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Backhand index pointing down before this gets intense. Speech balloon comment where you're watching from. Thumbs up like the video if you respect martial arts. Bell subscribe for real untold legends. Because what happened next wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. And once it began, there would be no taking it back. They stepped onto the mat. No insults. No shouting. No crowd cheering them on. Only silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, where every breath sounds louder than it should. Students formed a loose circle, instinctively backing away, giving the two men space. No one needed to be told this was serious. Every face reflected the same thought: this is real. Bruce Lee rolled his shoulders once, light on his feet, eyes locked forward. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but every muscle was ready. He wasn't here to show dominance. He was here to test truth. Chuck Norris stood opposite him. Still. Balanced. Calm. Hands up, guard compact. Feet grounded. His breathing steady, controlled. He wasn't trying to intimidate. He wasn't trying to impress. He was waiting. Bruce moved first. In an instant, he closed the distance, a blur of motion. His footwork was fluid, unpredictable, cutting angles like water finding cracks in stone. A fast jab, followed by a snapping kick, then a sudden shift to the side. His attacks flowed together seamlessly, each strike disguising the next. Students gasped quietly. This was Bruce Lee at his purest. Speed, timing, and intent fused into one. His pressure was relentless, forcing Chuck backward inch by inch. Chuck didn't panic. He blocked. Forearm met fist. Shin checked kick. Each defense was sharp, economical. No wasted movement. No hesitation. He adjusted his stance with small, precise steps, absorbing the force rather than resisting it outright. Bruce increased the tempo. Faster now. Harder. A rapid combination aimed high, then low. Bruce changed rhythm mid-attack, testing reactions, searching for hesitation. This was where most fighters broke, overwhelmed by speed, drowning under pressure. But Chuck didn't break. He waited. Bruce's brow tightened slightly. Karate wasn't collapsing like he expected. It wasn't stiff. It wasn't slow. It wasn't trapped by form. It was adapting. Chuck read the angles. He didn't chase Bruce's movement, he predicted it. Each time Bruce shifted, Chuck subtly repositioned, cutting off space, forcing Bruce to reset. His blocks weren't passive, they redirected force, turning attacks just enough to steal momentum. Bruce stepped back half a pace, reassessing. Interesting. He surged again, this time with feints, a false opening, a sudden stop, then an explosive entry. His fist snapped forward, stopping just short of Chuck's face before transforming into a back fist aimed from the side. Chuck raised his guard in time, absorbing it, then slid his foot just enough to regain balance. Still calm. Still controlled. The students watched in disbelief. This wasn't the one-sided display they had expected. Bruce was fast, faster than anyone in the room, but Chuck was solid. Rooted. Unmoved. Bruce circled now, studying. He changed tactics. Less speed. More pressure. He pressed closer, testing endurance, pushing Chuck toward the edge of the mat. His strikes came from tighter angles, his breathing steady, his eyes sharp. This was the phase where fatigue exposed weakness. Chuck exhaled slowly. He adjusted again. A subtle shift of weight. A tighter guard. His movements became smaller, more efficient. He wasn't chasing victory. He was conserving energy, letting Bruce spend his. A minute passed. Then another. Bruce felt it. This wasn't resistance. It was patience. For the first time, Bruce hesitated, not out of fear, but calculation. His philosophy had always been about flow and freedom, yet here stood a man using structure not as a cage, but as a foundation. Bruce attacked once more, sharp, committed, decisive. Chuck blocked, and didn't retreat. He held his ground. The mat creaked beneath their feet. The room remained silent. Everyone watching realized something at the same moment. This wasn't kung fu versus karate anymore. This was belief versus belief. And neither man was willing to blink. Chuck countered. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was sharp, controlled, and precise. At the exact moment Bruce committed to his forward pressure, Chuck stepped in, not back. His timing was flawless. A compact movement, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but devastating in its efficiency. His forearm deflected Bruce's strike just enough to open a line, and his counter followed instantly. Not flashy. Not aggressive. Just effective. Chuck's fist stopped inches from Bruce's ribs. The message was clear. The room froze. Bruce halted mid-motion, his body responding before his mind could catch up. He took a step back, not in retreat, but in recognition. The distance between them widened, and with it came something unfamiliar. For the first time, doubt crossed Bruce Lee's face. Not fear. Not insecurity. Re-evaluation. The students noticed it immediately. The man who moments ago spoke with absolute certainty now studied his opponent with a new seriousness. His breathing slowed. His stance shifted. He wasn't attacking anymore. He was thinking. This wasn't about kung fu versus karate anymore. It was discipline versus ego. Bruce had always taught freedom. Freedom from rigid forms, freedom from tradition, freedom from limitation. But as he stood there, facing a man whose strength came from structure rather than escape from it, he realized something unsettling. Structure wasn't the enemy. Ego was. Chuck didn't press his advantage. He lowered his hand slightly, maintaining guard but refusing to capitalize on the opening. There was no hunger in his eyes. No desire to dominate. Only control. That restraint spoke louder than any strike. Bruce circled slowly now, eyes narrowed, reassessing everything. He noticed details he hadn't before, the balance in Chuck's stance, the economy of his movements, the way he conserved energy without sacrificing readiness. Karate wasn't rigid. It was disciplined. Bruce attacked again, but differently this time. Less speed, more intention. He tested angles carefully, probing for weakness instead of overwhelming force. Each strike carried purpose. Chuck met him calmly. Block. Redirect. Reset. Every exchange felt like a conversation, question and answer. Bruce asked with motion. Chuck replied with precision. Neither raised their voice. Neither rushed. Minutes stretched on. Sweat beaded on Bruce's forehead, not from exhaustion, but from concentration. This wasn't the fight he expected. His philosophy had prepared him for chaos, unpredictability, adaptation, but it hadn't prepared him for someone whose discipline was so complete that chaos never entered. Bruce paused again. His students shifted uneasily. They sensed the shift before understanding it. Their teacher was no longer teaching. He was learning. Bruce lowered his hands slightly. Your karate, he said quietly, doesn't behave like karate. Chuck responded just as softly. Because I don't fight with style. I fight with principles. That answer landed harder than any strike. Bruce nodded once, absorbing it. In that moment, something changed, not just in the room, but in Bruce himself. The belief that adaptability alone was enough cracked slightly. He saw now that freedom without discipline could become reckless, and discipline without ego could become unstoppable. Bruce straightened his posture. I thought structure limited growth, he admitted. It does, Chuck replied, when you worship it. Not when you master it. Silence followed. The students stood frozen, witnessing something rare, two masters meeting not to conquer, but to understand. This was no longer a contest of bodies, but of philosophies refining each other. Bruce bowed his head slightly, not in surrender, but in respect. Chuck returned the gesture. The turning point had passed. No winner had been declared. No defeat had been suffered. But one thing was undeniable. Ego had stepped aside. And discipline had spoken. Chuck landed a clean technique. It happened in a blink, so fast and controlled that many didn't realize what they'd seen until it was already over. Bruce stepped in, testing one last opening, a calculated move meant to draw a reaction. Chuck read it instantly. He shifted his weight, rotated his hips, and delivered a perfectly timed strike, stopping inches from Bruce's chest. Not touching. Not harming. Just close enough to make the truth undeniable. The room froze. Every student stood motionless, eyes wide, breath caught in their throats. The faint creak of the wooden floor was the only sound left. This wasn't shock from violence, it was shock from precision. From restraint. From mastery. Bruce looked down slowly at Chuck's fist, hovering just short of impact. Then he looked up. Chuck lowered his hand. No celebration. No smirk. No claim of victory. He simply said, calmly and clearly, "Styles don't win fights. Mindsets do." The words settled heavily over the room. Bruce exhaled, a long, thoughtful breath, as if releasing something he had been carrying for years. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the confident smile of a man proving a point, but the genuine smile of a man who had just learned something valuable. "You're right," Bruce said. The students gasped softly. Bruce Lee, the man who challenged traditions, questioned systems, and reshaped martial arts philosophy, had just acknowledged another truth. He stepped back and bowed. Not deeply. Not formally. But sincerely. Chuck returned the bow immediately. In that moment, the room understood something profound. This wasn't a victory for karate. This wasn't a loss for kung fu. This was a meeting of minds, and one had sharpened the other. Bruce straightened and addressed his students. "You see," he said, gesturing between himself and Chuck, "I've always said martial arts is about freedom. But freedom without control is chaos." He turned slightly toward Chuck. "And control without ego," Bruce continued, "is power." Chuck said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence carried as much weight as his technique. The students looked between the two men, realizing they were witnessing something far rarer than a fight. They were watching two philosophies merge, not through argument, but through experience. Bruce laughed softly, shaking his head. "I came here believing adaptability alone was enough," he admitted. "But adaptability must rest on discipline. Otherwise, it has no direction." Chuck finally spoke again. "And discipline," he said, "must remain flexible. Otherwise, it breaks." Bruce nodded in agreement. That was the reveal. Not a knockout. Not a defeat. But a realization. Backhand index pointing down. "Now it's your turn. What do you think wins?" Speech balloon comment. "Style or mindset?" Thumbs up like if respect matters more than ego. Bell subscribe for legendary moments like this. Because moments like this don't make headlines. They don't get scripted. And they don't happen often. But when they do, they change everyone who witnesses them. And no one in that room would ever forget what they learned that day. Bruce bowed first. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't meant for an audience. It was honest. "I was wrong to underestimate karate," Bruce said quietly. "And myself." The words carried weight. Not because they were loud, but because they were rare. Bruce Lee had built his life on questioning limits, yet here he was, acknowledging that one of his own assumptions had been incomplete. The room remained silent. Chuck Norris bowed back immediately. "And I was wrong to think you wouldn't listen." That simple response sealed the moment. No tension remained. No rivalry lingered. Just understanding. The students stood frozen, watching two legends do something more difficult than fighting, admit growth. There was no applause, no celebration, because everyone sensed this wasn't a performance. This was a turning point neither man would ever forget. Bruce straightened and exhaled slowly, as if something heavy had lifted. "For years," he said, "I believed tradition held fighters back, that it chained them to the past." He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of his students one by one. "But today, I saw something different." He looked back at Chuck. "I saw discipline without ego, structure without rigidity, strength without noise." Chuck listened, arms relaxed at his sides. "I've trained my whole life inside rules," Chuck replied. "Not because I fear freedom, but because discipline teaches patience. And patience teaches clarity." Bruce nodded thoughtfully. "I've taught freedom," he said. "But freedom without clarity can become reckless." The two men stood facing each other, no guards raised, no distance kept. Not opponents now, but equals. Bruce extended his hand. Chuck took it. The handshake wasn't firm for show. It was steady, grounded, respectful. The students finally relaxed, breathing out as one. Some exchanged glances, realizing they had just witnessed something that would never be written in manuals or captured in tournaments. Bruce turned again to his students. "Today wasn't about proving which style is superior," he said. "If that's what you saw, you missed the lesson." He paused, letting the words sink in. "A master is not someone who wins every fight," Bruce continued. "A master is someone who is willing to be wrong, and strong enough to change." Chuck added quietly, "and confident enough to listen." That sentence struck deeper than any technique. The gathering slowly broke its circle, but no one rushed to speak. Conversations began in hushed tones. Some students looked inspired. Others looked unsettled, forced to reconsider beliefs they had never questioned before. Bruce walked alongside Chuck toward the edge of the mat. "You know," Bruce said with a faint smile, "if my students had been watching a movie, they'd expect a winner." Chuck smiled slightly. "Real growth doesn't need a scoreboard." Bruce laughed softly at that. "That may be the most important technique I learned today." They stopped near the doorway. Outside, the world was the same: traffic, noise, routine. But inside that room, something fundamental had shifted. No defeat. No victory. Only mutual respect. That day, Bruce Lee didn't abandon Kung Fu. And Chuck Norris didn't abandon karate. Instead, both men stepped beyond their styles. They left with something far more powerful than dominance. They left with balance. And everyone who witnessed it understood a truth that would stay with them for life. Styles shape fighters. But humility shapes masters. The strongest fighters aren't loud. They don't boast. They don't need to prove themselves with words. And the greatest masters never stop learning. What happened in that room wasn't about fists or footwork. It wasn't about kung fu or karate. It was about something far deeper, the mindset that separates a skilled fighter from a true master. Ego limits skill. It narrows vision. It creates blind spots. It convinces you that growth has an endpoint. Humility multiplies skill. It keeps the mind open. It sharpens awareness. It turns every encounter into a lesson rather than a threat. Bruce Lee didn't lose that day. Chuck Norris didn't win. Instead, both men walked away stronger, because they were willing to let go of pride and accept truth, even when it challenged what they believed. That is real power. In martial arts, and in life, it's easy to dismiss others. To assume our way is the best way. To believe experience or reputation makes us untouchable. But mastery doesn't come from dominance. It comes from understanding. It comes from listening. It comes from recognizing that every person you meet may know something you don't. The room that day didn't witness a fight. It witnessed growth. Students came expecting to see techniques. They left having learned a philosophy. That strength without humility becomes brittle. That confidence without respect turns into arrogance. And that true mastery is quiet, grounded, and constantly evolving. This lesson doesn't belong only to martial artists. It belongs to leaders, to teachers, to creators, to anyone who wants to become better than they were yesterday. Because the moment you believe you have nothing left to learn is the moment you stop growing. Fire if you believe respect beats arrogance. Speech balloon type respect in the comments. Thumbs up like the video. Bell subscribe for more untold martial arts legends. And remember this. Styles will always differ. Opinions will always clash. But respect is universal. Carry it with you, in training, in conversation, and in every challenge you face. That's how legends are made.